let's jump in. We're going to try to get through, I'll say that at the beginning of every lesson, Proverbs 5 and 6. We'll see how it goes. We will not be finished with Proverbs by Easter, by the way. That was my original plan, and it's just not going to happen. So we may take a little break towards Easter and do some Easter-ish lessons and then reconvene after that. But we'll see how far we get. But these two chapters are pretty blunt and just straightforward, and they're dealing with pretty much relationship type issues. Not only with couples, but just with people in general, wisdom that we should understand. Going into chapter 5 primarily focuses on a marriage type thing. Chapter 6 gets more into general, your friends and people that you're acquainted with. But it's all relationship kind of oriented. So let's dig into this today. Chapter 5. He kind of jumps straight into giving his son, we see here addressed in verse 1, about what he should keep in mind moving into the idea of getting married one day, about who he's going to choose, about what he does with relationships prior to that and even after that. Of course, who's writing? Solomon, who's had his fair share, I'm sure, of women troubles. David, we know, also had a lot of interesting things that tie into that as well. So this, I'm sure, is coming from the heart. I mean, he's probably learned a lot of lessons the hard way and maybe the right way, and he's bestowing that here in chapter 8 or 5. And he says, "My son, attend unto my wisdom." I like how he says that, my wisdom, because he's gained a lot. "And bow thine ear to my understanding." So he's sharing some personal, intimate, lessons that he's learned along the way. "That you may regard discretion." So we've seen that word discretion come up quite a bit. What kind of definition did we tie to that word? What does discretion mean? What do you think is that? Any ideas? Do what?
Just kind of be careful.
Being careful, being cautious. What do we all think? Discretion.
I think it is being thoughtfully considering what you say before you say it.
Yeah.
Or do it.
Thinking things through before you take a step or say a word. That's a good way of defining that. Discretion is taking wisdom and knowledge and applying it to your actions, basically, is what discretion is. So that you regard discretion and that your lips may keep knowledge. And then he moves into, here's what you really need to be careful of. "For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil." So he's characterizing, I'm sure, women that he's had experience with, of being smooth talkers and talking their way into your life and all this sort of thing, saying it's going to be tempting and it's going to look real good at first, but verse 4 says, "But her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold on hell. Lest thou shouldst ponder the path of life, her ways are movable, that thou canst not know them." Without getting anybody in trouble in here, has anyone ever known someone like that? Or you just can't pin them down, and they're always, I see it, you've seen, you're not into that dating phase yet, but I'm sure you've seen girls at high school who were like
It doesn't have to be a girl, it can be either side.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, it could be either way. People are just manipulative. It says her ways are movable, which means you never know what, kind of like Forrest Gump, you never know what you're going to get. And one day it could be this way, and the next day it could be another way, and you can't know what's to expect, kind of thing. And there are a lot of people out there, not even in relationship wise, but just working with them, your neighbors, even maybe some family members, You're just not really sure what you're working with at any given time. And he's cautioning his son here to stay away from that type of women, because it's just not going to end well, basically. It says, hear me, verse 7, hear me thou therefore, O ye children, and depart not from from the words of my mouth. Remove thy way far from her. I like that. Back in chapter 4, in verse 14, he says, enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. Just avoid it. I'll just go out of your way to stay out of their way. That's kind of what he's saying here. Remove thy way far from her, and come not nigh or near the door of her house. It's like, don't even go there. It's not going to be something that's going to end in a positive way. Lest thou give thine honor unto others, and thy years unto the cruel. What do you think he's referring to here? Giving your honor to others and your years to the cruel.
That was what I was going to ask you.
Maybe honor somebody else instead of the Lord.
That, or even do what?
Just being a people pleaser.
Being a people pleaser. Basically removing your honor of God and giving the wrong, like if you claim to be a Christian and yet you go in a path like this, your honor is no longer honoring God. It's giving the wrong perception of what God is all about, because you're acting in ways that aren't conducive to a Christian life, and you're just giving your honor away. You're forfeiting it, basically, so that people will not recognize you as even having honor. And the years unto the cruel. If you've ever talked to anybody that's done stuff like this, it's pretty much a lifelong venture of trying to get past it. We've seen TV evangelists and people who are in the major public spotlight fall into a sin of this nature, or any kind of sin, but especially of this, and just like the rest of their career, they're just, if they even have one after that, they're battling this over and over and over again, because people again are like, you're supposed to be representing God and you act like that strips away their honor. And then they're fighting that. Even if they get past it and get over it and move forward, they're just kind of fighting that the rest of their life. And that's what he's referring to here, is thy years unto the cruel, is that you're going to be reminded by people who are not going to be able to get over it and forgive you for things for years and years to come, if you ever get past it. Lest strangers be filled with thy wealth, and thy labors be in the house of a stranger, and thou mourn at the last, when thy flesh and thy body are consumed. Again, alluding to the fact of you're just yielding and forfeiting what God had planned for you, and others are going to be better off, basically, because you messed up. It's a lifelong, venture of dealing with the ramifications and the consequences of something like that for a lot of people. Again, especially people in the public limelight. I love some of the big preachers out there that are having a really effective ministry. At the same time, I'm constantly nervous. Was like, okay, what is something going to happen that all this is just going to fall apart? And you pray and you hope that that's not the case. I'll share a story here in a minute about that. But moving into chapter 12, or verse 12, 13, 14, kind of concludes the same concept. It says, and say, how have I hated instruction? So this is a person who's gone the wrong path. It appears in this specific example, verse 3, of a man being taken by a woman, and struck by her in a relationship way, and she's just basically crumbled him, and he's now yielded what he had, and others are surpassing him in status and even in good standing with God, And then this person who's found themselves in this situation, verse 12 says, they will say, how have I hated instruction, and my heart despised reproof? How is it that I allowed myself to go here? Why did I? Because I knew better, right? I know what the Bible teaches, but I did it anyway. And then you're beating yourself up. Not only is everybody else beating you up, but you're beating yourself up because you just didn't listen to wisdom. You didn't have that close relationship with wisdom, as he talked about in chapter 4. That you want to nurture that relationship with wisdom so that you don't end up in a situation like this. And he's saying, this person will say, I've hated instruction, and my heart has despised reproof, and have not obeyed the voice of my teachers, nor inclined mine ear to them that instructed me. I was almost in all evil in the midst of the congregation and assembly. I mean, the person who has fallen into this trap is just basically taking themselves to ruin. Whenever I hear stories like this and read passages like this, I think of a man named Steve French. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's the founder of the Kingdom Heirs, the Southern Gospel Quartet, who's in Dollywood. That's where their main career has been based. They're a great quartet. Won all kinds of awards, and I think this is their 35th year or something like that at Dollywood. He founded the group in 1981. Dollywood opened in 1986. It was Silver Dollar City prior to that. I was 12 years old when Dollywood opened, and I'd already been to Silver Dollar City for quite a few years as a kid. We would go down there and just, enjoy the atmosphere. And then she took over. In 91, she brought in the Kingdom Heirs as a featured group in the park. So that was the year Lori and I started dating. So I was 16 years old, I guess. And so we've just loved it. We're big Dollywood fans anyway, and we'd go down, and that's the first thing we would do is, when are the Kingdom Heirs singing? Let's go listen to them. And Steve French was the founder of the group. He was the spokesperson of the group. He'd get up there and introduce, welcome everybody in. He was just the voice of the group, the front person. And loved hearing him sing. He was the baritone singer. Loved hearing him sing. What he told all kinds of neat stories about the group and everything. Well, in 2014, so fast forward 30 some years, we went back. This was about a year before we moved back here. We went, because we had Dollywood passes even when they were growing up as kids, and we lived in North Carolina. We loved it so much because we would come in about every month or two and just to go to Dollywood and hang out. So about a year before we moved back, we went and saw the Kingdom Heirs. And Steve was a hefty dude. I mean, he's a big, tall guy, pretty good size, and he had lost at least 100 pounds. And he was just skinny as a rail. I was worried he was sick or something. He got to researching, and nothing, health-wise was going on. And we moved back here in 2015 and went back to see him again, and he wasn't there. So I'm like, what's going on? I wonder what happened to him. And so I pulled up some stuff online, and the story was, after 30 years of being with the group, he wanted to retire and just go enjoy the rest of his life out west somewhere, and just kind of enjoy himself. Well, a year after that, in 2016, the real story came out. I mean, this guy, has been a staple in Southern gospel music. Amazing Christian guy, living his, as far as everyone knew, living his life according to the Bible. But what really happened in 2014, he started seeing a girl who was an employee of Dollywood somewhere else in the park. And he was married, had a wife of 33 years. And he, in 2014, when we saw him so skinny and slender, had decided to leave his wife of 33 years and pursue a relationship with this girl. And in 2016, they kicked him out of the group. At that point, they were like, we can't let you stand up here and sing and you be involved with all that. So the group knew. I think Dolly got involved and was like, what, and then maybe that was her way of dealing with it to minimize bad publicity for the park, is to say, well, you're just going to retire and go away, and we'll just tell everybody that's what happened. But in 2016, him and this girl, he was 56 years old, and the girl was 29. And they held hands.
Talk about discernment.
Yeah, exactly.
Lack of.
Lack of discernment. And they literally, hand in hand, jumped off of the New River Gorge Bridge to their death together.
What? That's crazy.
Someone who's that well established in the Christian environment in Southern gospel music for 30-some years, it can happen to anybody. I mean, this guy was as solid as you can get, as far as everyone knew, and he had a lapse of, non-understanding. He didn't seek to wisdom. He used poor discretion, and evidently this exact passage, maybe if he could come back and read this chapter, he'd be like, I need to listen to this, because things just went horribly wrong for him to the point he committed suicide with this girl. And for what? I mean, you had this whole legacy, your whole life, your whole career, and then that's what you're remembered by, in the end. And it can happen anyway. We've seen it happen to big preachers on TV. The story with Steve French is just heartbreaking. And the group has continued on. They're still at Dollywood, and they've got different members now. Arthur Rice was their lead singer. He finally, a few years after that, he retired as well. He just took a worship pastor position at a church. So, he's just kind of retired on, and now they have all new members. Chris, Steve's brother, is still with them. He's the bass player. He's still with them. And Dennis, the drummer, I think has been with them since the very beginning. But everybody else is new. And it caused a lot of heartache for Dollywood and for the fans and all that through those years. It's been 8 years since then. But it harms a lot of people, and it does a lot of damage in a lot of ways if we find ourselves in this kind of situation. It's heartbreaking, and just to read these verses and to relate it to a real story like that shows us the severity of how bad it can get and how quickly someone can go. We're talking about this last night about how in the world can they make some kind of decision like that? Is you just you take a step in that direction and you get away with it. You're like, yeah, well, maybe this is the way I'm supposed to go. And then some people talk themselves into it. Well, maybe this is God's plan for me. This woman works at Dollywood. I work at Dollywood. Maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And we just totally lose all reasoning in our mind, and we convince ourselves that this is what we're supposed to be doing now for whatever reason. And it ends up like this. It's just kind of pitiful and sad.
It's amazing how talented every
Yeah.
one of those guys were.
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic ability.
One of my favorite groups ever.
Oh, yeah.
And
How about cry every time we go see him? From
Yeah,
my
because she grew up
childhood,
with Steve
I grew
up
up
there.
with it, and just going back Christmas time
Yeah.
makes me happy.
It's sad, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff left the group. He's the bass singer. He's now singing for Gold City. Jeff Chapman was his name. So he's doing well and everything, but it really crippled the group moving forward. It really did. So certainly some good words of advice of don't go down that road. It's kind of going back to verse 8. Remove your way far from her and don't even come near the door of her house, because it's just not going to end well. Going on verse 15, instead, he says, drink waters out of your own cistern and running waters out of your own well, meaning make sure you're firmly established in your relationship with God and just depend on the well within. Jesus even used that terminology, much later, 1,000 years later, when he was here on the planet, that out of, what does he say? Our belly shall flow a river of living water. He was talking to the lady at the well and said, I've got water. If you drink of it, you'll never thirst again, kind of thing, because God can put himself in us through the Holy Spirit. That should be our source of nourishment. That should be our source of wisdom, our source of everything. And he's teaching this concept 1,000 years before Christ in these verses, just to depend on your own relationship with God and use knowledge, use discretion. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of waters in the streets. Let them be only thine own, and not strangers with thee. Basically, don't be led astray. That's been a common theme all the way since the first chapter of Proverbs, is don't go in the way of the wicked. Don't let these sinners entice you. Don't let people draw you into these situations. Let thy fountain be blessed, verse 18 says, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. So he's kind of going back to this story he's telling about a strange woman who's alluring you off to another path. And he says, focus on what God's purpose is, what God's intention is for you, the wife of thy youth. Of course, back then, most of them got married early. Mary was, best we know, anywhere between 12 and probably 16 years old when she was found to be pregnant with Jesus. So this was an early thing, and as years passed, he's saying, hold on to that. Don't let life and other women and other ideas lead you astray. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe. So those are beautiful animals. Those are, what is a hind? I should have looked that up. You might know what a hind. What's another translation say?
Deer.
Deer. Okay. And a roe. What do they say a roe is?
Doe.
A doe. Okay. A deer and a doe. Be as a loving hind, a pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. And that's why it's important that you choose wisely as a young person. Who you're going to marry. Make sure that's the person you want to be with. And because that should be the person you're infatuated with the rest of your life. And yes, the new wears off and the honeymoon expires and you move on with your life and things seem to get normal and mundane, but you should always try to remember what brought you together and find all of your fulfillment to be accomplished within the person that you choose to marry. So it is a big choice. It's a big decision as to who you choose to live the rest of your life with. Verse 20 says, and why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman? He goes back to this. He's like, if you've got something good because you've chosen wisely up front, why would you be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a stranger? For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he pondereth all his goings. Basically, God's always watching. You're not going to do anything in secret because God knows all about it. His own iniquity shall take the wicked himself, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sin. He shall die without instruction, and in greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Again, just stark, harsh warnings against going off the straight and narrow path, as we could probably say in this case. Any thoughts as we conclude chapter 5, as we move into chapter 6 here?
Go ahead, no, ladies first.
Well, I want to go back to 15.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the version I read from? Says,
Yes.
drink water from your own cistern
Right,
and running water from your own well.
right.
Should your fountains be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets? There's a question mark.
Well, see, mine says, let thy fountains be dispersed abroad and rivers of water in the streets.
Yeah. It makes me question if he's not again talking about his fountains of water, it's his offspring or maybe his influence because he's with a woman that he's not married to.
Right.
And it's, again,
So,
reflecting poorly to me.
Through the Bible commentary
Yeah, what you
says,
got?
in other words, your offspring should be from your wife, not from a stranger.
right. Yeah, so verse 15, drink waters out of thy own cistern and let running waters out of thy own well, again means make sure that what's coming out of you is what should be coming out of you, which is God and his wisdom, his principles. In verse 16, mine is a sentence. It says, let thy waters be dispersed abroad and rivers of waters in the streets, meaning what does come out of you should be a good influence to others. So what is yours that's got the question mark? What version is that?
That's 16. It asks us a question.
New King
Should-
James? Interesting. That's a totally different context from the
Yeah,
King
it's
James.
Almost opposite.
Yeah, it's almost the opposite of the actual context. And what were you reading? I know yours is a commentary, but.
It's through the Bible commentary.
Okay.
I can't think of the guy's name, but anyway, I'll find out here.
But it's strange that they reference it that way when they have 600 lives.
Right.
It was a stranger in the 600
Exactly.
lives.
And again, it's
I think
interesting
that
to
God-
hear these kinds of things from someone who obviously has gone down a path they shouldn't have gone. And maybe that's why they're stressing it so much,
Yeah,
that
that's why
don't do
he's
what I
stressing.
did.
I think he's asking a question, or he hopes you know the answer.
Well, maybe that could be the context as well.
The last two verses, 22 and 23 that you read.
Yes.
My translation says, the evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
cords of his sin will hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly.
Absolutely.
See, in 17, I think, answers kind of what 15 said in yours.
Right. Yeah, if you do impose that as a question, the answer is verse 17, let them be only thine own and not strangers with thee, meaning stick with the right path. So whether you take that as a question or a statement, the end result is don't go doing dumb stuff. because it's not gonna end well. It's gonna be a poor reflection on you, poor reflection on God, and then you're gonna die alone, struggling with your decisions the rest of your life, as Bill pointed out there in the last two verses. So learn these lessons, right? As I speak to the youth in the classroom, make sure we make wise choices moving forward. All right, verse 6, or chapter 6, rather. We get into a little more general relationship things. He does kind of come back to the concept of not giving yourself away to promiscuous women and all that sort of stuff. But he also mentions some other things, which are good things for us to know. He says, my son, chapter 6, verse 1, if thou be surety for a friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. So you're snared with the words of thy mouth, and you're taken with the words of thy mouth. What in the world is he talking about? I know other translations use different words than surety, probably there.
A pledge.
A pledge.
Yeah.
Basically, what the context of this, the surety is, today's modern concept would be co-signing on a loan for someone who is not going to be able to withhold their end of the bargain, and it's going to just drive you into financial ruin in doing so. He's saying don't do that. He's not preaching against or teaching against co-signing for people who you're just helping. A lot of parents will co-sign with their kids on stuff, and even if it's just a friend and it's like something small, you're just trying to help them out, and maybe you're able to just pay off the whole loan, but you're trying to help them out to establish credit, or they're in a hard time, you're trying to pull them through it. It's not saying don't help people in that way, but don't put yourself in a situation where the words of your mouth snare you into something you can't get out of, and is just going to drive you to financial ruin, is pretty much what the summation of those two verses are about. Verse 3 says, do this now, my son, and deliver thyself. When thou art come into the hand of thy friend, go, humble thyself, and make sure thy friend. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler.
Don't rest until you've taken care of it.
Okay, don't rest until you've taken care of it. Don't be blindly going into something that's obviously a trap. or a bad decision. You know, I'm assuming animals at some point may realize, oh, these guys with these sticks that shoot fire at the end of them are bad for us. And if you just walk right out in front of one, you know, it's kind of like walking out in the middle of the road. It's kind of a dumb thing to do. When you know there's a danger there, don't go there. That's kind of what verse 5 is alluding to. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. But don't fly into a trap. Don't walk right into something that's going to be the end of you. And don't do it blindly. That's kind of what he's getting to there in verse number 4. So be smart about it. You know, if you ever get into that situation, make sure you think it through. Go to this person. Make sure that you can count on them to hold their end of the deal. Safest bet is not go there at all. But, you know, if you feel led to help somebody out, make sure it's the right decision for you, so they don't walk away and then you're stuck, you know, dealing with the consequences of that. And then he says something very interesting, verse 6. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. What do you think he's talking about there?
Don't be lazy.
Okay, don't be lazy. Exactly, that's what he's saying. And he says go to the ant. Now, he's not talking about your relative, but an actual little bug called an ant. It says, verse 7, speaking of the ants, these ants have no guide, no overseer or ruler, but they provide her meaning the ant here, personifying it as a female, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. See, these little ants, who are just little bugs, have enough sense to prepare for their future. They gather in the harvest. They prepare. They don't have anybody telling them what to do, but they figured out, I've got to do something to plan and prepare for the future so that I'm taken care of down the road as I pass through the seasons. So you pay attention to them. So have you ever watched ants?
Busy.
Do what?
Ants and bees are busy.
Yeah, they're very, you know, I don't sit around and watch bugs much in my life anymore, but I used to as a kid. You know, we used to see them. Of course, we've been seeing them in our garage lately. I've discovered there's a bag of birdseed that busted and is sitting on the ground, and there's this army of ants going in and out of the garage taking little pieces of that birdseed somewhere.
Not in my room.
Do what?
I had problems with them a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we've had an infestation there a few years ago. We had this, you know, our bathtub, it's an older house built in the 70s. It had a bathtub with a big sliding glass door with a silver framing. Well, the kids were in the bathtub. This has been 2016, I guess. And it was Faith, it was either Faith or Joe, I can't remember. And they pushed on the door, and the little screws had come loose in the bathtub. This was right after we moved in. And the whole thing shifted, and just a flood of ants just came out from underneath the rail. And I think it was Faith, and she started screaming and carrying on. There's ants all over the place. They got all over the bathroom. We had a bad infestation. But these ants are very hard-working animals. I mean, would be an insect, I guess, not an animal. But they do. They follow in a line. They work together. They are, you know, not questioning each other and aren't fighting over who's going to do this. And they're just cooperating and working and doing what they need to do. And they're just little insects. And God is saying here, consider this. And you should be just as hardworking. You should be just as cooperative in your future and in your life and planning ahead. And he asks the question, how long will you sleep, O sluggard? Love that word. Yeah, pretty brutal. When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. He's like, you're just sitting around doing nothing, just sleeping and napping and just being lazy. So shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man. So what that's talking about is what you want is not going to come to you. This armed man reference is like a man with a shield that you can't get past. That you're going to be stuck in your poverty because of your own doing, and you're not going to be able to get yourself out of it. Again, tying it kind of back to the earlier conversation of if you make a bad financial choice with another person who bails on you, then you're going to be in the same situation. So he talks about that type of person who makes a bad choice, and this type of person who's just being lazy.
This is like Aesop's fable with the ant and the grasshopper.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly, yeah, it really is. And he's just, you know, the end of that's not going to end well either. Goes on to verse 12, he starts to speak, and this is the passage that most people have heard of, the 7 deadly sins. It's not really listed as that, but that's what we've called it, verses 16 down to 19. But verse 12 says, a naughty person, which means evil or ungodly is what that means. A naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. He winketh his eyes, he speaketh with his feet, and he teaches with his fingers. What does that mean?
not sure about the feet and fingers, but you know, the winks.
Yeah, like, you know, they're being
Man, this
sneaky.
really ain't gonna
They're
happen.
saying one thing, but they're doing something else. That's what the references of their feet and their hands is. That their actions are speaking louder than their words. You can really tell what's going on with this person by their behavior. Frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually, and soweth discord, or drama, as we would say today. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly, and suddenly he shall be broken without remedy. So that's the end, and we see that all the time. I mean, I'll see in high school people be manipulative and sneaky and conniving, and then they get in a bunch of trouble, and some of them end up in jail, and you know, all that sort of stuff. Just the end of that, it's not going to go anywhere positive at all. Then he goes into the 7 deadly sins, as we've called it. These 6 things doth the Lord hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. Why do you think it starts off saying 6 things and then 7? It's kind of interesting. It's basically it was a poetic tool to build up suspense
Even more.
and drama. Like, I got 3 things to tell you. The 4th one's really going to get you. You know, it's like they're just adding to it to build suspense and drama, the writer is. And these are the things. A proud look. That is someone who thinks they're better than everybody else. And they look down on everybody around them. A lying tongue. That's pretty obvious. The hands that shed innocent blood. That'd be, you know, a murderous person. A heart that deviseth wicked imaginations. Feet that be swift in running into mischief. And a false witness that speaketh lies. And he that soweth discord among the brethren. Those are 7 things that God hates. Yet, those are common things that we see in a lot of our churches, unfortunately. You know, there's always that person that's always stirring up something. It's always talking about people behind each other's backs. We see this constantly in the media and in politics. I mean, that's all we're going to be seeing over the next year is people bad-mouthing each other and trying to get you to believe something bad about this person so you don't vote for them. All this sort of stuff. The Bible says God hates those things. So that's just simple, you know, behavioral things that we want to avoid because we know God is not going to be happy with that at all.
Could the haughty eyes be translated conceit?
Yeah,
Person is
being conceited, you're better than everybody else, you're more important than everybody else, and all that sort of stuff.
Arrogant.
Definitely. Do what?
Arrogant.
Arrogant, absolutely. And God hates that sort of thing. All right, we're going to shut this down soon. But let's go ahead and at least read through the rest of it and see what we can come up with. So verse 20, my son, keep thy father's commandment, and forsake not the law of thy mother. Bind them continually upon thine heart, and tie them about thy neck. Again, action words. Hold on to these good teachings. Hold on to what we should. When you go, it shall lead thee. When you sleep, it will keep thee. And when you wake, it will talk with thee. It's something that's going to be part of your nature, to follow the commandments of God. It's to exercise good wisdom, good decisions. For the commandment is a lamp, and a light, and the law is a light, and the reproofs of instruction are the way of life. I think we lose a little bit of context of this lamp and light reference this day and time, because anytime it's dark in our life, what do? We turn on a light, all right? They didn't have that back in this day. This was 3,000 years ago. Electricity only existed up to 250 years ago. So it's, almost 3,000 years since electricity was going to be invented. They had to depend on the sun, the moon, and candles for a fire. So this was a little more impactful possibly to them, that's how important God's commandments and God's law should be, is the thing that lets us see our way through life. To keep thee from, here we go again, with the evil woman, from the flattery of the tongue of a strange woman. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. We see that in cartoons, that bat their eyes at you and all that sort of stuff. Don't be lured off by this. For by means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. What does that mean? By means of a whorish woman, a man is brought to a piece of bread. Poverty could be. It's totally just in ruins because of your decisions. I don't know about you, but I can eat a piece of bread pretty quickly. And
I can eat a whole load.
And that's another context of your time spent with a person of this nature is just going to be over before you know it. It's temporary, yet its effects are going to last possibly the rest of your life. We got to make sure we're making good choices with that. And then he asks some rhetorical questions here, which is, again, I think back to decisions like what Steve French had made. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can you pick up a bundle of wood that's on fire and it not hurt you? That's what he's basically saying. Like, duh, if you do these things, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get burned. Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned? So he that goeth into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her, shall not be innocent. Men, do not despise a thief. Well, let's stop there at verse 29. So there, obviously, it's never going to be a good idea to venture into a situation like that when you know the outcome's not going to be good. I mean, what were you thinking, kind of thing, when we think of the story of Steve French? I mean, what was he thinking? I mean, he had all this established, a marriage of 33 years, and within 2 years he jumps off a bridge to his death, holding the hand of the woman that led him astray. I mean, how pitiful is that? Verse 30 kind of shifts thoughts here. It says, men do not despise a thief if he steal to satisfy his soul when he is hungry, but if he be found, he shall restore sevenfold and shall give all the substance of his house. It's an interesting verse there. Men don't despise a thief if he steals to satisfy his own soul when he is hungry. What do you think that's talking about?
Person starving.
Okay, yeah, don't be too, try to be as understanding as possible, yet at the same time, they're still doing something wrong. Don't be so judgmental that you don't recognize their circumstances, but still, they're going to be held accountable to that as well. It's kind of what it's doing. Verse 32, but whosoever committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. A wound and dishonor shall he get, and his reproach shall not be wiped away. For jealousy is the rage of a man. Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not regard any ransom, neither will he rest content, though thou givest many gifts or bribes. So what he's saying there, in short, is if you go down that road, not only are your decisions going to impact you, but the jealousy that comes from doing things of that nature, the jealousy itself is the rage. It is what drives a person to do even further ridiculous things. And no matter how many bribes someone could give you or anything that you could benefit out of it, it's not going to help with that jealousy issue, with that just thought of you just can't deal with the situation. What is jealousy? Because there's biblical jealousy. The Bible says that God is a jealous God. It doesn't mean he's immoral. But we also think of jealousy. You mentioned that the other day, the jealousy issues between all these wives and girlfriends. What is jealousy? if we had to define it.
Wanting something that someone else has.
Okay, covetingness, wanting something someone else has. In a relationship situation, it seems to be more of, you want to be the center of that person's attention, yet that person's attention is centered on someone else at the same time, and it just drives you crazy to the point you're just continually making bad decisions. No matter what benefits you're gaining out of it, it's always going to be something that's just fueling rage within you. So obviously not a path we would want to go down.
What about vengeance?
Do what?
Vengeance.
And vengeance. He even says, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. Even regardless of how it turns out, even if it turns out justly, it's still going to be a bad thing for that person to even venture down that path.
It's never good to commit adultery.
Absolutely.
And I don't
There's
think
no
a-
circumstance where it would
There's
be.
a complete forgiveness for that, at least from the perspective of the man whose life you violated.
Right, right.
And same thing with a woman.
Absolutely.
I know my trust was severely hampered,
Right.
and I mean, I asked for forgiveness for it, but
It's-
it's not something that goes away.
That's what he's saying. It's just, regardless of how it shakes out, it's going to be something that affects you in a negative way forever. And it's just one of those things that a lot of interesting pieces of information to just stay away from that choice, stay away from that path, because it just doesn't end well for anybody. All right, well, let me shut this down online, and we'll see you guys next week as we get into chapter 7.